Hi guys, it's Jonah here. Welcome back to our dissertation mini-series. Today we'll be interviewing Keir. So it's me, Jasmine, and Alex. So yeah, let's just jump right in. Keir, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your dissertation?
Yeah, I certainly do. Hello, I'm Keir. I'm a theatre and philosophy graduate, graduated in 2020. I did my dissertation in theatre, but there was a lot of philosophy involved. I couldn't quite help myself. So I did my dissertation on the dramaturgy of co-authorship in Tim Crouch's performances. Tim Crouch being a favourite director of mine, and co-authorship as a dramaturgy basically just means when the audience have some sort of control or authority over the outcome or shared experience of a performance. And then I related it to the political possibilities of such a structure within Crouch's performances and within theatre as a wider medium.
I'm confused. I'm sorry. These are just way too long words that I think I know the meaning of them, but I'm sure I don't. So let's just break it down. You said dramaturgy, right? At some point.
Yeah, I did say dramaturgy.
Okay,
But there is no set definition of dramaturgy. One of my
that's helpful.
masters in it, and will uh, and has learnt that there is not a great way to simply describe it. But if you want me to give my bash at it, a dramaturgy is a structure or a way of understanding a performance. So in this context, the dramaturgy is the structure in which the audience can participate. So you could have a more passive dramaturgy, which would be you're sitting proscenium arch and you're watching four white men in a drawing room just discussing something. Where I'm talking about dramaturgy in which the performers, the audience have feel like at least they have some sort of control over the outcome. So in a very simple would be like pantomime as a dramaturgy of co-authorship. He's behind you. They're shouting. The act of them participating makes the person on stage turn around,
Right.
and so that would be a co-authorship dramaturgy.
So you mentioned a director, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
Tim Crouch.
Right. So could you tell us a bit about him and why he's so of interest to you?
Yeah, I certainly could, and I'll even link it to why he's philosophically interesting as well.
That's great.
So Tim Crouch has works within the belief that you don't need to be dressed up in period pieces for a piece of performance to be convincing. He influenced a lot of my work in the belief that naturalism is dead and that film does it better. And within theatre, there's absolutely we're never going to really convince people that we're actually in 1940s Russia, like because we're not. We're in an auditorium and they're up on the stage. And so Tim Crouch really embraces that and does a lot of performances where he'll have like a stick and he'll be like, this stick is my brother. And then for the rest of the play, that stick will be his brother. And we think that it takes a huge leap of imagination to believe that, but it doesn't. If you say this stick is my brother, everyone in the audience goes, okay, this is theater. They're allowed to do this. That's the beauty of it. And what he explores in a more academic sense is like the ontology of which things can exist on stage. So it's like if this stick leaves, as my brother also gone? And if I say now this stick is my brother, the ontology, so ontology being what the study of things that exist and the existence of things, the existence of my brother has moved. And within the specific play that I wrote my dissertation on, Total Collective Immediate Terrestrial Salvation, catchy, he further pushes the idea of audience ontology and how the audience exists within the play.
The audience? How do you play with the audience's ontology?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So, in this performance, the audience sits in a circle in a black box room, and you are given the play text to read along with the performers. a very unusual dramaturgy, a very unusual structure, but that was one of the first things that really got me interested. Okay, so we're reading along, and the play is about a cult leader who is predicting the end of the world.
Right.
And throughout the play, your audience members are slowly asked to start reading lines and to take part as we read along with the performers. And then about halfway through, the penny seems to drop slowly around the audience, where you start to realize that we, the audience, are members of the cult. You are starting to not just support Tim Crouch, the director, and his play, but you're starting to support Tim Crouch, because he also performs in it, the cult leader. And there's those two layers that you exist both as audience and cult. One way that he plays with this ontology of audience is through a technique called interpolation. Now, to interpolate something is to position someone in a position that you want them to be in. So the classic example, to expand that a little bit, the classic example is if a police officer shouts, "Oh, you," and you turn around, you've interpolated yourself as the person he was looking for. If you just walked away, you're not in any position, but you become that person. And what Tim Crouch does is the same. He interpolates us as the cult without us even realizing he's doing so.
I'm sorry, Keir, that's just a great word and a great concept. I mean, that is, sorry, just continue.
Yeah. So how did you first hear about Tim Crouch, and how did you sort of like start refining your diss question, or like the title of your diss?
So I wrote my diss prep, as you do in third year, of like, this is what I read, and it was about Scottish politics and theatre, like really, really standard, but something I was interested in, but really vague. And then I was at the Fringe, and I very randomly decided to watch this performance and completely fell in love with it. I was like, I'm going to write my dissertation on this.
When you say the Fringe, you're referring to the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, right?
Fringe Festival,
okay.
Yeah. And I pitched it, and I'd already been assigned a tutor to do with Scottish politics and theatre. But luckily enough, this tutor had also written books, including Tim Crouch. So yeah, shout out to Liz. She a fantastic person to have when I was writing my dissertation. And from there, I took what I already thought was an interesting topic and then just researched all of Tim Crouch, just read all of his plays, read every academic journal that had been written about him, just became obsessed. I was like a little fangirl. Like, if I ever meet him, I will cry. And then from there, I realized that what I thought was interesting was far more interesting, just as specifically as a dramaturgy, like audience becoming cult, actually had political possibilities as well, and that's political and philosophical. And then that is where I then decided to push my dissertation.
So how did you manage to because obviously your head and heart were both in theatre and in philosophy. How did you marry the two so well? Because it feels like it is quite a natural thing, but I think when you get down to actually writing dissertations, that must be quite difficult and daunting to think, like, these are all of my interests and I want to involve them. Or did it just come naturally?
So when I wrote my proposal, I was going to take on 3 different areas in like theatre, politics, and philosophy. No, that's not how it was actually. Each of the points had all 3 wrapped up in them. And then I started researching, doing little bits of writing, or at least discussions with Liz. And one of the best bits of advice that she gave me, she was like, start writing. Just right now, start writing. And by the time I got to 10,000 words, I'd covered 1 of the 3. And what I did was I just patched the other 2. I was like, I have a dissertation. You know what I mean? I don't, and thank goodness, because I know people who were doing all 3 and then got to the end and were like, I've barely touched the surface with any of them. So actually there was a serious whittling down process for me to get this specific. I only talked about 1 play. I talked about the other plays that fed into it, but I only analysed 1 play, and it took me 6,000 words to do. So there was no way that I was going to be able to talk about more, even if I had wanted to, which I would have.
It's the kind of I mean, obviously, theatre is the kind of thing that you should really enjoy in person. But do you think it's the kind of play that you can only really appreciate if you're there, like in the audience with the script in your hand as part of the where you're kind of that kind of idea of co-authorship you're talking about? Do you think you could enjoy it from a point of view in which you're not a co-author?
As someone who has thrown themselves into digital and virtual reality theatre over this last year, I do actually give a lot of benefit for the ability to be able to feel still a connection to a performance. But in terms of sitting around in the circle and watching other people slowly become part of the cult, I do think that the intimacy of that play was really important, and it would be challenging. Even if you had the play text at home, everyone would have to be live on Zoom. You'd have to do it. I have seen plays like that where the performer will interact with you, and you can see everyone else as well. They look like they edited them like hovering, everyone hovering in the performance space. Really cool, but it would have to be done. You'd have to use an intimacy in tech, not just a recorded version of it, which often a lot of the digital performances are.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that work, becoming a cult member? I mean, in my mind, the audience is just a passive observer of something happening on stage. Were there moments in the play where the audience was expected to be more active, or was it just the power of the words and the ideas and the imagery?
Two things. Firstly, we're never passive observers. We might like to think we're not. We're always active. And secondly, what we did with the cult, it's a clever nuance in the interpolation techniques. So you can go either way when you try and interpolate an audience. You can either put them as a character that they so do not associate with. They go, I'm nothing like that. And the purpose is you're trying to get them to reject whatever that character's ideology is. And then you get them with someone who's actually quite similar to them, maybe too close to home. And you're like, oh, I have too much of a relationship with that person, but I don't really like the way that person is acting. Or I really want to be like that person. Maybe I should try. And so that's what you got. With the cult, it feels like it's quite far away. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to be part of a cult anytime soon, but I bet you a lot of people who join cults think that. So, and what we were doing within, well, what I argued in my dissertation was that we think that we have like quite a lot of control and autonomy in our own lives. You know, as citizens within like a neoliberal framework, we're seen as like the individual has the autonomy and the idea to act. But actually, I don't think we have as much as we believe we do so. And I think that is what was important with interpolating us as a collective cult, was that we thought that we had more autonomy, but it said at one point the line just said, someone in the audience says. Before he was pointing at people like you say this line, you say, and then it started just saying someone, and people just started doing it because it just said someone in the audience. And we got more and more into like contributing. He like weaned us in by small lines, and then there was whole paragraphs that people were volunteering to do, with the thought that I'm choosing to do this, but no, you're not. Crouch always knew you were going to do it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Go, Jasmine.
No, I was just going to say, like, it's amazing that, like, an experience like that, because it is not just watching play, it is an experience, has like stayed with you so much. But also, I bet even if someone wasn't interested in theatre and that was the first time they went to a play ever, that performance would have stayed with them forever. And the philosophical implications of it as well are so subtle, but just when you actually talk about it, it sounds really, really obvious, but like it's crazy how it just creeps up on you.
So within your dissertation, was there, I mean, I'm not sure if this is a misfire question, but within philosophical dissertations, there's usually a stance you need to take. Is that the case in film studies? And if so, what was the stance you were taking?
Can't tell you much about film studies, but I'll tell you about
Sorry.
But I'd say that you have to do this pretty much any humanity.
Before, just correct me, because I completely forgot.
You need to take a stance, or what you doing there. I mean, have an opinion.
That's true.
And my opinion was that co-authorship as a dramaturgy in both the way that Tim Crouch did it, but in wider theatre as well, and in much more subtle ways, perhaps, has political possibilities. Because if we can create an environment within the artistic sphere where people have the opportunity to reflect upon how they participate, what their participation means, and whether they had as much autonomy over the way they participated than they previously thought, then hopefully that will then seep into their reflection on how they can participate in wider society. And that was my stance, that we should have more performances which use this form of dramaturgy, this style, with audience co-authorship, because it will allow for a greater self-reflection of in people's wider lives.
That's very interesting. So it's basically you're arguing that it's a microcosm, that we can play out different roles within society, and to understand and hopefully later reflect on how we take up these roles and why, and if it is after all due to ourselves and the self-authorship we have.
I'm a firm believer that art is not or should not be just a mirror with which to reflect society, but a hammer with which to shape it. I think that we should have artistic spaces where people can be playful, people can be silly, and come up with off the walls ideas. And that is where you can then find the ideas that you need to implement in the much seemingly more rigid world that we live in.
So I'm going to ask a boring question, but I'm sure your answer will make it interesting. What was your experience writing your dissertation? Because, I mean, if people have listened to the podcast before, they'll probably know that you're dyslexic, and it is a huge piece of writing you have to do. So what was your experience?
I was lucky that I was doing something that is hopefully clear that I was passionate about. That was a massive help.
What? No.
I had been doing something that I didn't like. By God, I would have hated it 100%. In terms of the kind of how long it took me to get the thing out in the structure that I wanted it, that was probably the most challenging thing. I've always had a real issue with structuring my essays. My mind is kind of like a mind map, where it's there's an idea and there's an idea, and I'm going to jump and link these two, but then I'll introduce what I need to talk about. That's not how you should. And so basically, I again, Liz really helped with being maybe just rethink the order that you're introducing things so that your argument flows. And I would say that would be, I would advise people you have sections. I had 2 chapters, and the first one had 4 sections, and the second one had 5 sections, and getting them really subsectioning them and being this is exactly what I'm talking about at this point. And then, and then even get them on bits of paper. I'll do this when I devise plays. I'll get each scene on bits of paper, and then I'll move them around and just lay them out on my bed and move them around so that I can see what needs to be in which order. So I found chaptering and then subsecting really helpful in terms of working out how I convey any sort of argument over such an extensive piece of writing.
Nice.
Just going back to the fact that you do joint honours, how did you... It's possible that the answer to the question is that you just always knew that you were going to do theatre, in which case that's fine. But how did you make the decision of deciding what you were going to do for your dissertation? And did you kind of always know that you were going to combine a bit of one into the other, or how did that kind of play out for you?
I don't think I always knew that I was going to do theatre. I came to uni to do maths. That was what I applied. Did a year of maths, and then was do I want a maths degree? Absolutely not. So I dropped to do, and philosophy was my 3rd subject. And then at the end of second year was I don't want to stop doing this. It's really interesting, and took it on. I think that I write better in theatre because, as I said, I don't understand how people know which order things are meant to be done. And in philosophy dissertations, it's bang, bang. It has to be done real solid structured arguments. Where in theatre, there's a little bit more room for verbose, flowery language to make it sound like you know what you're doing when you like really don't. Where in philosophy, none of that. Yeah, I mean, do not try and pretend you know what you're talking about. So that maybe like led me towards theatre a bit more. Also, that's sort of the career path that I wanted to go on into, and that's the sort of like I would say the last 6 plays I've directed all have had a degree of co-authorship, massively influenced because I did that dissertation. Like it was really pushing there. But in terms of the linking between them, I don't think I even was like conscious that I'm going to get philosophy in there. I was just reading about theatre, and the philosophy was what was interesting to me. And I think that anyone who's doing or a joint honours with philosophy, you will find some philosophy in your subject. Like if you a high enough level of any subject is just philosophy. So I was always going to pull those together.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. I think that's pretty why philosophy is so helpful, because I mean, the fact that it's dealing with fundamentals, by definition, I mean, if you're studying the fundamentals of any subject, you're going to have come back to philosophy. I wanted to ask again about the sociological and political implications of co-authorship. Because I guess my understanding was kind of that if you like once you realize that you're not necessarily a spectator and that you can interact, then that kind of gives you an extra level of freedom, or it kind of makes because a lot of the time, maybe even in democratic countries, you kind of feel like you're watching a kind of a political theatre play out that you don't necessarily have much control in. But then once you realize that actually you do have the power to co-author a political future, then it kind of gives you more freedom. Is that kind of where you were going to when you kind of mentioned that political theme to it, or am I just have I missed the point that you were making?
No, you not missed it. I think there's maybe a good way to explain it would be to layer how I got there. And so at first there was a bit of a movement like late at the end of last century, beginning of this century, where there was more and more interactive, large scale performances. Like Punch Drunk were doing these big warehouse performances where you would come in and you would seem to have complete control. It was like a fairground almost, of like where you walked and who you talked to, and there was performers in other rooms, and then people like realized that they could make a good bit of cash of this style of interactive performance where you're giving audience autonomy, and they started creating performances like Bandersnatch but live, before Bandersnatch was a thing. And they were like, you have so much control, you can either walk through this door or kill your dad. And and people, you know, go into these like, wow, I have so much like control over the performance. It's like, no, you don't. Like, you will pick either of these two options and either to completely set, and then the performers will go. And I think that people started to realize that it was an easy way to bring people in, by giving them this false sense of like autonomy or authority over a performance. And that has been a critique that has been leveled towards Crouch and some of his work. I argued that it wasn't that, because he was making a point of trying to get people to realize the fact that they didn't have the autonomy, rather than just making the assumption that they did, and that's why they were there. And if you ask a Scottish person about how much control they really feel like they have politically over the UK government, they perhaps might say that they don't feel like they do. But then if you ask someone from England, they might be like, yeah, of course I do. But we've got one vote each. Well, how is it any different? But because we need to assess the structures in which our one vote actually impacts. And I think that Crouch's work with co-authorship, and hopefully other work with co-authorship as well, is a space to get people's minds ticking. Again, as I said to Alex, that if you can start to realize within artistic sphere that you don't actually have the control, that the people who you're paying your money to are making you believe you do so, then you will start to realize that in many other spheres of your life, I focus specifically on the political one in my dissertation, but in many other spheres, you do not have as much autonomy as you are told you do so, and sometimes as you actually believe that you do so.
I would like to ask if you had one piece or many pieces of advice for someone who's about to embark on their dissertation, aka me and Alex, what would that piece of advice be?
Don't be afraid of switching. If you like kill your darlings, even if you get a little bit in, be like, you know what, this is not it. Find something that's it, because you're gonna spend a lot of time doing that thing. And then on the other side is once you're in, don't flip to my flatmate Angus. Like we were talking 48 hours before his dissertation was due, which he'd had 4 extensions was on. I was having a conversation with him about it, and he was like, "Keir, you know what? You're right. I'm going to switch my question." And I was like, "That is not what I was trying to get from you."
No. Did he actually switch his question?
He switched his question because he switched his question so many times. It was the absolute fear. He did it. He handed in his dissertation on like did the all-nighter, and then handed it in at like 4 p.m. the next day. His girlfriend bringing him snacks all the time, and I was like, "You're the person that they tell you not to be." My advice is don't be Angus.
You're the meme, man. It's just the meme that
it's a meme, but it's real.
Since the internet began, it's the only meme that's happened.
People are like this.
Angus's privacy. We've changed his name.
Yeah. David, you've been outed. So yeah, that was it. Like, don't be afraid to switch at the beginning, but don't switch right at the end, because you're just gonna screw yourself up. And I think find like yours, like a specific niche. Like, don't go too wide. That's like fairly standard. Don't go too wide. And then start writing as early on, because you only realize what you need to research once you've started writing about it. I did so much research on such interesting things that had nothing to do with what I actually wrote about. It was only when I started writing that I did that thing where I went, God, my argument doesn't quite make sense unless I know what I'm trying to say. I better research this. You forget, and maybe that's not the best way to do it. Maybe you should have all your research and a whole argument formed and then start writing. But that's actually really challenging. And
does it ever happen like that?
Your argument is to start writing early on, realize what's shit and what's good, and then obviously go with the latter.
Nice. That's a good solid piece of advice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think we've squeezed Keir. I'm sure he's got a lot more juice, but I think we've squeezed enough out of him for the moment.
About it again. There's a word though that I've been trying to find in my mind for like the whole thing, and I can't remember it. Another like fun word that I wrote like one of my sections on. Gutted that I've forgotten. That I spent so much time researching and can't even remember. But that'll be it. Well, really nice talking about it, and thank you.
If you remember it, just text it to us, and we're gonna put that as the title of the episode.
We're like, wait, what has this got to do with anything?
Exactly. And that's authorship, because they're gonna think about it. I'm kidding. I just invalidated the whole like 1 hour.
He's not understood a word I've said. Oh.
Exactly. I'm kidding. Keir, it was so fun to talk to you as always.
Yeah. Pleasure, guys.